Okay, we are live. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the fourth in our series, I think, cost. In our series of 10, we're looking at the 10 knowledge areas, and just want to do a quick shout out and welcome to everyone who's joining us from across the country. We usually have a few from the States as well, so welcome to anyone from south of the border. And a quick shout out to City of Barrie. They've done a little special setup for us where they've got a bunch of people in the room. I think they have about 20 people all joining in, so that's very cool. Yeah, we're going to talk about cost in our ongoing series of 10 knowledge areas. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So our hosts for today, as always, myself, David Donaldson, and we have our newest member of our team, Jessica Burney. Yay, welcome. This is actually Jess's first week, so she's been with us less than, what is it, 4 days? Day 4? Day 4, so welcome, Jess. Jess is going to be supporting us on sound and technology, so if you do have any technical issues, either fire her an email, jess.burney@titleshift.ca, or you can just pop it in the chat window, type in a quick little message to her there. Jess is going to be monitoring the chat, her email, responding to you as well. Of course, as always, if you have any questions on the content as we're going through our materials today, please feel free to type in the chat at any time, and Jess will make sure that I get to those. If you do run into some serious difficulties and we're not able to resolve them, the session is being recorded as always, and everyone who has signed up will get a link to the recording. It's going to cover off some of the tools that you have. You'll see at the top of your screen you've got a little icon of a person with his hand raised, and if you hit the drop down there, got a number of options. So if you have a question or if you want to pause or something, raise your hand. There's also speak louder, speak up, slow down, that kind of stuff. And we have the chat box. It'll be there pretty much the whole time. So if there is anything, feel free to just pop in there and type in a message to us. And of course, as always, we accept applause. All right, moving on. Our opening thought for today, cost. This is a toughie actually, because when we take a look at PMBOK, when we take a look at cost, there's really not a huge amount there, but yet it seems to hold a really, really high important place in the real world of project management. So I was really looking for a very applicable quote, and I came across this one by Henry Ford. Make the best quality of goods possible at the lowest cost possible, paying the highest wages possible. And I really love this quote because it goes beyond the middle piece, which is the lowest cost possible. And I think in projects especially, we tend to get too focused on that lowest price or the lowest cost possible, and we lose the quality and we lose the wages piece. Now the quality piece, that's going to seem pretty obvious, I think, to most of us. Most of us, we think, okay, I want to create a quality product when I'm done for sure. And there's a lot more thinking and a lot more people who are focusing on the whole balancing of what you get in the return. So we're getting actually value for our money, but the highest wages possible. Now, Henry Ford was quite a revolutionary for his time because industrialists in the day, they were very much like, if I make money and no one else does, they didn't care. But Mr. Ford, he wanted his employees to be able to buy his products, and this was a big important tenet for him. And what he was doing was he was looking beyond his own company. He was looking beyond his own profits and looking at the environment and the industry and the country that he was in, and thinking, if I have employees who are being paid such a low wage, and remember this is pre-union, this is pre-living wage stuff. People were making such a low wage, they weren't able to earn a living. And Henry Ford thought about that and thought, well, if my staff is being paid so low, they won't be able to buy the products that we're creating. So hence, what he was thinking is, if I do this correctly, not only will I create a good product at a good price, but we'll also create a market in effect, because you'll now have people who are available to buy it. And I really want to put that into the context of projects, where I want to think beyond just getting the job done, getting it done for the lowest price, but looking at how can we create a more sustainable model that is going to enable us to move forward and continue to move forward. So I couldn't talk about cost without using one of my favorite graphics. There's always someone who says they can do it for cheaper, but at what cost? And yeah, I don't think I want to be that artist when that gentleman has a look in the mirror. All right, let's pop into our first question. What barriers are you guys facing? So I'm just going to switch over to our question mode here. There's an area down the bottom below the question there. What barriers are you facing to managing your project costs? So I want you to just hop into that bottom area there, give you a few moments, and answer that question. What barriers are you guys facing? Okay, so we're getting some great answers in here from Steve the Unknown. Absolutely, we're going to be chatting a little bit about that. Always difficult when you're trying to deal with that unexpected and unknown. The expanding scope, the out of scope items from Chantel. Oh yeah, there's just there. I think we can do an entire session on that one alone. From Walter, client expectations. Absolutely, Hetel, low budgets. Eleanor, sometimes the approval of your budget. I'm guessing, Eleanor, you're referring to getting approval for your budget. So yeah, we'll have a quick chat about that. From Carol, the low budgets, the additional hours. Absolutely. So we're going to be looking at some concepts during our time today around this whole concept of what kind of drives our budgets. Yep. Okay. Good. Just checking the other chat window to just make sure we're not missing any. Okay. So back to our main mode here. All right, so we're going to keep those questions in mind as we go. And, this is putting this together, I really wanted to kind of start off with this kind of thought here when we talk in terms of success. Now, when I ask this question, what is project success? Most common answers we get: on time, on budget. And unfortunately, yeah, that's not the real thing of success. And we've chatted about this in our other sessions. When we talk in terms of project success, it's about addressing the need. Have you addressed the need, the problem, the need, the opportunity? Is that end product, that deliverable, has it met the acceptance criteria? And this is where we get true success. Because the reality is, and I mean, we can do a quick show of hands here, but the reality is we have all been on projects, most of us anyways, who have been on projects where, we delivered the deliverable at the end of the project and it didn't meet the need, it didn't address the problem, or even worse, the product was shelved and it was never used. So you can imagine, I've just spent 6 months and $500,000, building this thing, we'll call it a widget. We're building this widget and it never got used. This just doesn't make sense. And while we want to balance out our time and our cost, absolutely, and, kind of hitting on target and kind of figuring out what that looks like, and we tend to get really measured on, are we on budget? But, we need to look beyond that and ask ourselves, are we addressing the problem, the need, the opportunity? Will that product be accepted and put into production? Without that, we've got nothing, right? So we need to make sure those pieces are in place. So we're going to put that aside because, we're going to move forward with the assumption that it is. But we then ask the question now, but what if the deliverable is to be sold for a profit? Now, when we talk in terms of project management, managing projects and projects in general, they cost money. That's a fact of life. You don't get something for nothing. So we need to make sure that we're balancing off that cost with the return, so hence our return on investment. And I'm going to use a sold for profit type scenario and just sort of plant that in our minds. Many of us are doing internal projects where we're not actually selling the product, but we also want to sort of consider it from that aspect. And this is where we get into that whole economic evaluation piece. And as PMs, as project managers, we're often not privy to this conversation. We're often not brought into the loop. We're often given the budget ahead of time, or someone else did the economic evaluation, they did the ROI, they did the business case, and we're kind of handed this and said, here, go do this, right? But we need to have some understanding of that. So if we put on our senior management hat, if we put on our strategic thinking senior management hat, and ask ourselves, well, we've got this pool of money, and we've got a whole bunch of projects we want to get done. Which ones get accepted, which ones get rejected? And this is what this piece is all about. Now, there was a company I used to work for years ago. They had $3.2 billion worth of projects in flight. And yes, that was billion with a B. So there's a lot at stake, But you take a look at that, and of the hundreds of projects that were in flight, there was also hundreds more in the wings waiting to be done, waiting to be, I don't have the funding. And this is the proverbial I've won the lottery scenario, right? I want a Porsche. I really do. I don't need a Porsche. But I'll tell you something, the second I win the lottery, I'm going to need that Porsche because now we have the resources, right? So when we have constrained resources, and everyone does, we need to consider the value of the project versus other corporate standards. And this is things like cash flow and revenue streams and all that kind of stuff. So if I take, let's say, that $500,000 I used in my first scenario, and I invest it potentially in the stock market, I might get a greater return. Or I go and buy some product that I could then hence resell or something. I do something different with the $500,000 than run the project and get the deliverable out of the project. The question now is, what's the best use of that money? So this is what that whole cost benefit piece is all about. And the business case, which is at the launch of the project, this is about comparing the differential costs and the benefits. So how much is it going to cost me to run my project? In this case, $500,000. What's the benefit that I'm going to get back? And we need to be very cognizant of that when we're running the project. And really, at the end of the day, it is all about survival. Because if, as a company, we spend more money than we take in, money is the company's lifeblood, right? This would be like over-exercising and not eating enough food, right? You are going to die, right? And the company is an organism. Right? So it needs food, it needs revenue coming in, and it needs to have that greater or equal to what goes out, right? So, you've got a dozen staff in your small company, you're paying them, $100,000 each per year. Well, you need to bring that in, you need to bring that 1.2 million in just to meet payroll, right? Plus all of the other expenses. So you need to bring in a revenue of, let's say, $2 million per year just to stay alive, right? Now, if you want to grow, well, now we got to invest money in, right? So this is where projects and what senior management does is they look at the available resources. So they say, okay, we're bringing in 2.5 million in the coming fiscal year. We brought in 2.5. We got expenses of 2 million. We've got this 500,000 available to do something with. So what can we do with it? Well, we could pay it back to our employees in a profit share. We could invest it into the company somehow, and in that investment in the company, we run a project. Well, if I don't get back a return on that 500,000, it's wasted, it's lost. And now instead of costing me 2 million to run my company for the year, I'm now costing 2.5. So now I've got to earn even more, right? So we got to kind of find that balance. And you tend to find that companies that are flush with cash, that have effectively won the lottery, where they got this big income, they kind of get a little bit more relaxed about it, right? They don't worry about, project went over budget, who cares, we got lots. But when you get into scenarios where, okay, hold on a second here, we've only just got enough, I can't afford to waste that money, right? And again, it's all about survival. So what we are doing as PMs is we're helping our companies to survive by keeping our projects under control, okay? Now, to illustrate this, we're going to look at something called life cycle costing. Now, the chart that I have here, it starts out on the left. Time is on our y-axis across. And if we go up from $0, we're into profit. If we go down from $0, we're in loss. It's a very simple, here's our net starting point, right? So we're going to start today. We're going to start a new project. And what we're going to do is we're going to invest money into that project. Hence, we're going to spend, so we're going to dip negative, okay? Now what we're going to do is we're going to break this chart up into basically 4 segments. The first segment is the project itself. So that S curve that we always talk about, we're going to talk about it a little bit later. Well, that's right there in the purple. Now you notice the S curve started after we've already dipped into the negative a little bit. And the reason for this is that the formal start of the project, which happens with our charter, is often done after there's some investigation. The investigation costs money. So we've got this great idea. We're gonna create a new version of our widget that we sell, and it'll be bigger, better, faster. Like the iPhone 7, for example, that just came out. We've got the improved widget. Well, there was some investigation done before we decided that yes, we want to do this project and we want to invest. So if we look at the very left end of that chart and that little dip that just is there, maybe that was a couple $1,000 as we did a bit of market research or had a couple of meetings or whatever. Then we formally started the project. Okay, so now we have permission. Let's spend the $500,000, and we've spent it. So what happens at the end of the project life? Well, the product is now available. We're selling it. We're getting a payback. If we're in let's create a project to create a sellable product, well, now we're selling the product and we're starting to get money back in. Now, if the project was, let's say, a business process enhancement, well, now we're operating more efficiently. So remember that $2 million for the fiscal year to cost to run the company? Maybe we just, as a result of the project, we cut it down to 1.8 million, and we're now saving 200,000 per year. So over the next couple of years, we're going to save enough money to pay back the original investment of the project. So let's say we spent 200,000 on the project. We're saving 100,000 a year. It takes us 2 years to pay it back. We're now back to a net zero. So it's going to take us 2 years to get back to where we started. As the product life continues and we continue to save 100,000 per year, we're now going to go into the positive and effectively into the profit. So that profit is either in the form of I've got a new product I'm selling, and now I'm making money from that product. So it cost me, $500,000 to create the product. I sell the first 500,000 worth of the product. I'm now back to zero. I sell another 500. I'm now into profit. I sell another 500. I'm now into even more profit, and so on. The downturn at the very end of the product life is usually from the standpoint of decommissioning. Oftentimes, if it's a machinery type thing, we'll have less efficiencies. We've got more breakdowns. Think of your car. When you first buy your car, there's a big investment. The payback is you get to drive around. You get to, you actually, I'm able to be employed because I have a car now, that kind of thing. But near the end of its life, it's starting to cost me in repairs, and it's now getting more expensive to run my car, so I sell it and buy a new one, that kind of thing. So whether that's, the new air conditioner on the top of the building, whether that's the new credit product if I'm in the banks and, in the banking industry, maybe we put out a new Visa card or something. There's that downturn at the end as we decommission the product, right? So there's some investment there, transitioning our customers over to the new product and things like that. And the trick here, the magic here is really to, know when that's going to be turning down and then, hence transition to the new one. And you'll actually see this in buildings. A couple of years ago, we moved from our old building, and the reason we moved is because they were planning to tear the building down and turn it into condos. So the building owners was starting to encourage their tenants to leave. Now, if you have an office building, and I think the magic number is around 20%, when you have 20% occupation, the building effectively pays for itself, and then beyond that, you're starting to get into profit. Well, they were below 20%. We were down to about 5 or 10%. So the building was actually costing them. So they're actually on the downside of the curve while the rest of the leases kind of ran out until they could, get the last people out and then start the new cycle. Okay. So some quick definitions as we're going. I've been using this term cost. Cost is the amount of money needed to run the project. So if I just back up for a second here, that's that dip down to the bottom where we end the project. Price is the amount the resulting deliverable will be sold for. So if we think in this in terms of, I manufacture widgets, it costs me, let's say, $10 per unit. I manufacture them, I sell them, that's my price. I sell them for $7, I got $2 profit, that kind of thing. So those are just some quick definitions I just want to be clear on as we move forward. Now, one of the challenges that we face with projects is we tend to look at the end deliverable and ask the question, how much is it going to cost to create that deliverable? Well, the reality is deliverables don't actually cost anything. It's the activities that go into creating the deliverables that cost stuff. So let's put this into a context that I think all of us can relate to. We're hiring a contractor to renovate our kitchen. Now, as much as we pay for materials, the new countertops, the cabinets, the new appliances, we pay for the activities. So, we get that estimate and he says, it's going to cost $20,000 to renovate the kitchen. Well, what he's really saying is it's going to take him X number of hours times X dollars per hour. And really, this is what we're talking about. Now, one area where I think a lot of us are struggling when it comes to controlling our costs, and guilty as charged. We look at the direct costs, the indirect costs, the fixed costs, the variable costs. And there's actually a concept called full cost accounting where we take into account both direct and indirect costs. And when we run a lot of projects, the moment we're starting to use internal staff, we don't count their salaries towards our cost. So a lot of project budgets are actually technically understated because we got internal staff. Now, this really becomes an issue when we're doing partial cost accounting, where we're not accounting for our internal staff, but yet we now have to bring in a contractor to fill in either a skill gap or a resource gap. And now all of a sudden our budget perceives to have jumped up because we've got this now direct cost, which used to be an indirect cost. So an indirect cost is a cost that we would be paying regardless of whether we ran the project or not. My salary, for example. So to run this webinar, there's an indirect cost of my salary. Now the reason we call that an indirect cost is because you're going to pay my salary whether I do the webinar or not. Well, assuming I'm still employed. So, that's kind of considered an indirect cost. Now, a direct cost is something that's directly attributed to the project. So if we go back to our kitchen, the materials, the wood, the tiles, the counters, that's a direct cost because if you didn't do the project, you wouldn't incur that cost, right? Now, an indirect cost is, just the cost of running your house, which you sort of have to continue on. Fixed and variable, kind of the same thing. Fixed, you pay a fee for the permit on your house. It's the same whether you're doing just the kitchen or the kitchen and the bath. Variable would be the amount of materials. So, it's a bigger kitchen, there's more countertops, right? That kind of thing. So, activity-based accounting is really about thinking and applying cost factors based on activity. So the more activity you do, the more cost there is, in effect. Okay. So managing costs. Now, what about managing costs? After all, we are talking, project management. Where does it fit in? Now, we've seen this graphic before. So for those of you who have attended my sessions before, I use this one a lot. I use this in a lot of different discussions. And this is the basic flow. We start at the charter level. Really, it's about figuring out the business need, the why. That leads us to the product scope, which is the what, the thing, the deliverable, which leads us to our project scope, which is the how, which is the activity, and that comes out in the detailed plan. And we've actually been looking at this in the last two webinars. We looked at our scope, which was the need and the product scope, and then we expanded it out into the project scope and the activity, getting down to those nitty-gritty details when we talked in terms of time. So where does cost fit in? Well, here's why cost is so challenging, because cost fits in at the top, at the charter, before you've even started getting all those details. But cost also fits in at the end. And the magic is when the first number matches the second number. And that's the challenge. That's the real challenge, folks. Because at the very beginning of the project, when we're got this kind of vague idea, we're going to renovate the kitchen. What the heck does that mean? Are we talking, we're just going to slap some paint on the walls, or are we going to rip the whole thing out right down to the studs, new drywall, new countertops, new appliances, the whole gamut, or some version in between, right? When we're at that charter stage, those are the questions we're asking and kind of working through, and yet we're expected to have detailed cost analysis at that point, right? Well, to do a detailed cost analysis, if we consider activity-based costing, we need to have the activities, which is way down the bottom after the project scope. So we get into this, chicken and egg thing, and it makes really hard to get a good solid estimate at the beginning that's going to match up with that detailed plan when we're done. And this is where we run into a lot of our challenges. So we now look at it from a more detailed perspective. We're thinking about what's in and what's out. We're doing our work breakdown structure, which goes into our network diagram, which becomes our Gantt chart, and so on and so on and so on. And there's costs involved with all of this, even just taking time to figure out what's in and what's out. Remember years ago, I was with one of the financials, one of the banks, and I was in the SOX project, in the SOX team, and Sarbanes-Oxley. And there's about 60 of us on the team, and we had a new guy join, Don, and he's sitting beside me. He worked with me. And now I'm about the only non-accountant in the room. And Don's an accountant. This was like his second team meeting. And he looks at me and leans over. He says, "Look at the money." It's like, "What are you talking about, Don?" He says, "Well, you work with HR. How much, these are all level 9s and 10s, right? Their salary ranges. how much money is it to take that 1 hour every week? Right? Because we're meeting Friday for an hour. And it's like, yeah, I added it all up, did a quick little calculation. There's a lot of money there, right? So even just to have those discussions, it costs money. To do your work breakdown structures, to do your network diagram, your Gantt chart, your risk assessments, to bring the team on board, to manage the team, it all costs money, right? And we need to be thinking about that in terms of when we run our projects and how we run our projects. So it goes far beyond just the cost of the materials, right? So we want to be thinking about those kind of things. All right. Can't do a 10 knowledge area Pinbocky webinar without popping into Pinbox. So here we are. Project cost management processes. There's actually only 4, which you look at that and go, but hold on a second. Cost is such a hugely important piece. It totally is. But you got to remember, if we go back for a second, all of this comes out of your schedule, right? And your schedule comes out of your activities, and your activities come out of your products, and your product come out of your work breakdown structure, and so on and so on and so on. So if you are doing your job well, you're not going to get into managing the cost, truly managing your costs, until after you've done your schedule. And as we saw in the last session under time, we're now into rolling wave. We're now into the 3 to 6 months piece of your project, then the next 3 to 6 months, and the next 3 to 6 months. Now, that's not to say you can't do a high-level estimate, for the larger 3-year project. You absolutely can, and you should. But when you get down to actually managing the dollars, we're now down to the details. We're now down to the individual activities and who's doing what and all this kind of stuff. So we take a look at those processes. Plan our cost management, estimate the cost, determine the budget, and control the costs. And this is all the stuff that we layer on top of our schedule, on top of our Gantt charts. Okay. I like to pick a focus here, and when it had 6 and 7 processes to pick from, it was, this one was both easy and hard because I didn't really have much choice. So we're going to take a look at estimating. We're going to look at determining budget. We're going to look at controlling cost. All right, estimate cost. So this brings us to our next question. What the heck's an estimate? So I'm going to pose that question to you. How would you define the word estimate? Let's give you a few moments. Getting some really good answers here, folks. Oh, multiple attendees typing. I always like to see that. All right. As those other folks are typing in, let's review some of the answers that we've gotten so far. First answer right out of the gate, educated guess. And you know what? I've asked this question lots and lots of times, and that's always the first answer. And you know what? Hank, I think your name is Hank. You're absolutely correct. It is a guess. It is absolutely a guess. The amount of effort. Hours to complete the activity. Tony, interesting that you chose hours and not dollars. If you wouldn't mind popping in and expanding on that a little bit, that'd be great. Eleanor, an approximation. Yes, estimates are always an approximation. Now, the question now becomes how much of an approximation is, or how accurate are you? Because we do get estimates where it's like, I'm really sure on this, and I'm estimating within a very narrow range, or this is a total wide guess, swag. Educated guess at cost of and effort to complete task or project from Alexis. Love that answer. Yes, because we estimate both the cost and the effort. Now, Tony's back in. Hours equals labor per hour. That's what I thought you were going for, Tony, and thank you for that. So that really layers on top of what Alexis was, Alex is saying. It is about the time and the effort. So dollars, you're right. Labor, hours, per rate per hour, that kind of thing. So we want to think about how much effort we're putting in, because that will translate into hours. Now, I'm just going to connect that back to our previous discussion around direct and indirect costs. If I'm using internal staff and I'm not billing those hours back, there's a kind of hidden expense to the organization. So what can happen there is we could actually go way over budget, and meanwhile it doesn't appear that we are, because we're putting in extra hour, extra time, things like that, but it's not actually being billed to the project. From Celine, best guess on what you think the cost will be, and oh, that's a beautiful one. We're going to expand on that one. Educated guess at costs. Love the educated part there. Based on previous experience from Chantel, all estimates are based on previous experience. Okay, we're gonna explore that concept a little bit. Approximate calculation, projected cost of the delivery of the product or service based on historical figures. Again, we're looking at our history here. Rough value in numbers, hours, times, costs spent, deliverable project. Yes, absolutely. Guessed values based on prior iterations and experiences. Absolutely. So you guys are all over this. This is great. Okay. Let's pop back into here. Okay. So here's my definition of an estimate. First of all, it is a prediction, right? When you are estimating, you're being asked to predict the future. So literally, folks, you are pulling out the crystal ball and looking into the future and saying, what do you think it's going to be? Now, a key here is realistic. Okay. Too often times we're asked for estimates and then we're forced or encouraged, I'm going to use the word encouraged, into non-realistic estimates. So we want to try to make these estimates as realistic as possible. Dollars or days, and very savvy group with us today. You guys are already all over that, because yes, you're absolutely right. Days, time, hours, effort, that all is a cost. Okay, but the real key here, when you're asked for an estimate, you are predicting the future. And the more realistic we can be around that prediction, the better. Now, there's a really interesting study that was done. Well, a whole bunch of them, but there was one in particular where they wanted to see how hard it was to influence someone to answer a wrong answer. And here's what they set up. They set up a bunch of computers and asked, and these were PhDs from university. They asked them to answer a series of questions. And they're simple A, B, C, D questions, right? So you'd read the question, you'd have A, B, C, D, and the correct answer was C. The catch was, though, while you were answering, you could see what your associates were answering. So you're about to answer C because you know that's the right answer, and you see Jess answer B, and you see Al answer B, and you see Greg answer B, and you see Catherine answer B. And so now you're sitting there thinking, wait a second, these are all my highly educated, highly learned associates. I know these folks. I respect them. They're answering B. I'm sure the answer is C. 33% of the time, people were convinced by that. And of course, what they were seeing was plants. They weren't actually seeing their associates. They thought they were. 33% of the time, they answered incorrectly. They answered knowingly wrong to go with the team. So this plays out with estimates, because now that's a very black and white. I know what the right answer is. And 33% of the time, they were encouraged or motivated to answer incorrectly. Now we get into an estimate which is much more, well, let's just say it's less black and white. It's a little bit more gray. So, we can be encouraged into a less realistic response fairly easily. Now, we touched on this whole concept of the accuracy of the estimate. And if we look at a timeline of our project, so that line through the center, feasibility study, the requirements, the design phase, the actual development, the testing, that kind of thing. The further we go down this line, the tighter our estimates become. And if you want to think about this from a personal experience perspective, if I asked you at the beginning of a 3-year project to predict the exact day when this project's going to finish, you'd be like, I can't, it's impossible. It's going to be around this mark, right? So you could probably give me like within a month or two. Halfway through the project, I ask you again, it's going to be tighter. Now let's think about this a week before the project finishes or a month before the project finishes. You can probably predict pretty much to the day when it's going to finish. So, the further you go down that project timeline, the more accurate your estimates are going to be. Now, this is part of what's driving the whole concept of Agile, because what you do is you work in smaller, shorter chunks. So you can actually, within that chunk, you can be a little bit more accurate on your estimates. So there's kind of that little bit of a side benefit there. But we also have to, and this goes back to a comment that was made at the very beginning under barriers around customer expectations. We have to go back to and ask the simple question, what are people expecting, and how has that been aligned, right? So those are going to be some important things to think about. Okay, our next question. How do we estimate when we don't know? So I want you to ask, oops, sorry, wrong one. Clicked on the wrong box. There we go. How do we estimate when we don't know? Because we've already defined what an estimate is. It is our best guess. It's based on history. It's based on previous experience and so forth. So how do we estimate when we don't know? Okay, got some really great answers. We got a really good group here today. I was just reading over your answers and thinking about that. First one, right out of the gate, Chantel, approach individuals who have experience in this area. Absolutely. So, this is one of the best things you can do. First, let's go find someone who has done it. Now, what's interesting is I said to you, well, how do you, do an estimate when you don't know? And the simple answer is, well, you don't. You can't do a good, accurate estimate when you don't know. So what do? You go and find someone, right? Use an analogous. So try to do something similar, right? Some market research. Consult the experts. Again, approaching an individual with experience. Rule of thumb from previous similar. So there's our analogous again. List assumptions and take your best shot. I love it, Steve. Beautiful. Yeah, and listing the assumptions. This is about setting those expectations. Now, I was on a project a few years ago, and it was an R&D project, research and development. It was a project that was literally the first time in the history of man that this has ever been done. And estimating, no. It's like, what, we'd do a little bit of research, we'd do some experimentation, we'd learn from that, we'd move forward and so on, right? So that project was very different in that we didn't really identify, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, that kind of thing. But what we did is we focused more on short spurts and do some, research and do some testing and experimenting, and then take those learnings and apply them. So yeah, take your best shot. Order of magnitude and similar projects. So again, that wider range, Hentel, thank you. That wider range estimate. And now we're back into setting those expectations. Yeah, but so from Chantel, 100%, this research time eats into the cost, absolutely, right? So now we get into that whole, it's going to cost us more to run that type of a project. And, from an expectations perspective, we need to make sure that, people are prepared for that and they're kind of aware of that, right? And this is where the whole learning theory curve comes in, right? So under learning curve theory, I always want to say learning theory curve. Learning curve, the first unit takes longer and costs more than, so after I've done 10 units, 20 units, 100 units, 200 units, 800, 180 units. And it doesn't matter what those units are, whether those are houses, whether those are classes, right? So if I look at my effort in delivering a class, so we're developing a new class for a client, a new program, the first delivery, it's going to take longer, there's going to be more effort involved, etc. Now, once we've done it 2, 3, 5, 20, 100 times, it's super easy. I mean, if I look at the prep that I do today for a class that I taught for the first time 7 years ago when I joined Title Shift, you grab the book and go kind of thing, do a quick flip through because you know it so well, right? But those first few times, it's like, oh my God, this is so daunting. Same sort of thing, and this is why we go to people who know their stuff. And again, the estimates are all based on history. So we look at that basic scenario. You know, we want to be realistic. You've been told it was going to be 3 months, and it was actually done in 18 months. Now, if you're the customer, if you're the sponsor of this project, you're probably not going to be very happy. But if you were told it was going to be done in 18 months and it was actually done in 18 months, even though both projects were done the same, you're probably much happier with the second result. So this goes back to a larger discussion around, as a PM, are you being viewed as a technical resource or a trusted advisor? And if you're being viewed as a trusted advisor, then likely scenario number 2 is going to be the one that's playing out, because you're going to be telling them it's going to take 18 months, and they're going to accept that because they're trusting you as an advisor, versus the old, no, just get it done in the 3 months, and meanwhile you've been telling them up and down it's going to take 18. So let's move on to determining budget. So what is a budget? So how would you define the word budget? And we'll skip over the cost price thing because we've already had that discussion. So how would you define a budget? Okay, some great answers coming in. Total amount allocated to the project, Hetal, and thank you for that word, allocated, absolutely. Financial plan of what you expect to spend. I want to just qualify that a little bit, Eleanor, because you're right, but the word expect. A budget is how much has been approved, how much you're allowed to spend, how much you expect to spend technically really is an estimate. And this is a really important point, so thank you so much for that, because what it does is it really helps us kind of separate the words estimate and budget. We tend to use them a little bit interchangeably. So budget's what you're allowed to do, and an estimate is how much you think it will take. And where we run into problems is when those two numbers are not aligned. Steve, the dollars it will take to get the job done, again, that's kind of more of a definition of an estimate. It's how much you're allowed to spend. Chantel, total resources, people, money, etc. you'll need for the project. The resources dedicated to the project from Hank, absolutely. So you see words like allocated, dedicated, approved, the amount you're allowed to spend, right? Allocated, again, we see from Celine, Alex, approved for the project. From at a estimated amount of money and resources to be spent on the project, totally agree, but it needs to be approved, right? And this is where we really set ourselves up for trouble, is we get into the scenario where the estimate and the budget, which are two different things, are not in alignment with each other. So we're looking and saying, well, you know what, I'm estimating realistically it's going to take 200,000 to get this project done. Someone says, well, you've only got 150, go. That's when we're really, we're going to be running into troubles. And this is why I put that piece in there around, are you as the PM a trusted advisor? Because if you're a trusted advisor, you'll have some influence and some ability to help get those two numbers in alignment with each other. Okay. So we've actually, I think, had a good job of contrasting the estimate and the budget. The estimate is our prediction. The budget is our approval. So I don't think I have oh, I do. There it is. So let's just ask the simple question. You can answer either or both. When is an estimate valid and when is a budget valid? So when do you think an estimate is valid and when is a budget valid? All right, I think we've kind of got this. I'm going to deal with budget first. Eleanor, budget is valid when it is approved. Couldn't have said it any better. Absolutely. A budget is only valid when it's been approved. An estimate is valid. Chantal, an estimate is needed for creating a budget. Absolutely. Oh my goodness. If we could get, our senior management to like live that would be awesome. I don't know about you, but I've had so many times when I've been given a budget before any estimate was even created or thought about, The estimate is valid when it has been based on historical factors and when it's realistic. That's it. And that one's a little bit more foggy to define. A budget is valid when it's approved, is 100% clear. Absolutely. Okay. So budget, it's the approved amount of time of estimate of the project or any work breakdown structure element. So that's from PMBOK. Next slide, please. There we go. Key elements, it's approved, right? And it's the approved estimate. So you'll notice in PMBOK, they actually say it's the approved estimate as opposed to it's just an approved amount. So that's kind of a really key piece there. It really should be based on the estimate. So when we look at the estimate versus budget, the estimate is a prediction, the budget's a desire, the estimate's a request, the budget's the approved. So we base it on those. Both of them are future-oriented. They're both based on history, best practices, laws of physics. Budgets are often also based on desired performance, and they're also often based on available resources. And this is where we run into those constrained budget scenarios. One of the tips, and this actually popped up a little bit earlier, is make sure that you are taking into account both controllable costs and uncontrollable costs, and you really should be handling those separately. The reason I say that is because if I'm going to be held to having my project on budget, I can do that with the controllable stuff. With the uncontrollable stuff, I can't so much. So not really kind of a fair performance to do on there. And this is where your reserves come in. So your work budget, really this is the predictable or controllable pieces, the contingency management reserves. These are for the non-controllables. And we'll go into more detail on those when we get into risk. And one way of dealing with this is to do things like expected monetary value, which I'm just going to step over because I know we're running a little bit short on time here. Okay. Now, when we talk in terms of estimating and budgeting, we're looking at resources, we're looking at duration, we're looking at cost. And we've actually already touched on this quite a bit. As I said, very savvy group here. You really need to estimate both. You need to estimate both your resources, your durations, and your costs. So which should we do first? Well, I'm a huge fan of estimating my resources first. And the reason for this is you get different resources, you get different time amounts. So consider two possible scenarios. We've got Malcolm. Malcolm's a good guy. Love him. But he's an intern. He's just learning the ropes. Then we've got Diana. Now she's the experienced veteran. She's the one who wrote the book. She's been here 20 years. She knows what she's doing. So I put in a different resource, Malcolm or Diana, we're going to have a different duration. And if we have a different duration, we have a different cost. So what are the priorities now? Diana's twice the price. Malcolm is cheaper, but also slower. So if I have a scenario where time's my number one, money's my number three, I'm going with Diana. I'm going to spend the extra money. I'm going to get the higher experienced resource, get the job done. If money is number one and time is number three, so I can afford the delay, well, you know what? I'll go with Malcolm. A little bit less expensive, take a little bit longer, but we'll still get the job done. So let's move into controlling costs, which is our final process we're going to take a look at today. How are we doing? It's a really simple question. Where are we at? Now, I initially grabbed this slide and I thought I'm gonna pare it down to just the S-curve, but then I thought no, it makes sense to keep it all there. Because we need to look at our S-curve, but we also need to look at the bigger picture. And this is really the discussion of earned value. So earned value, we have our plan value, we have our budget at complete, which is our total. So if I got $500,000 project, budget is going to be $500,000. The plan value is that S-curve. And then I've got my actual cost. Now, I've got my two curves there. I can take a quick look. Let's give you the first poll of how are we doing. And here's my scenario. We're going to build 10 widgets. Those 10 widgets, I'm just going to reopen this. There we go. The 10 widgets, we're going to build them in 10 weeks for a cost of $10,000. So you can kind of picture the project there. And for those of you who have been in my sessions before, this is a common scenario I use. We're at week 3 to cost at a budget actual cost of $2,500. So where are we at? So go ahead and click on the votes yet should be open. Not getting any votes yet. There we go. Good, it is open. Phew. Just have one of those panic moments that I might not have opened the poll. So go ahead and click what you think is the best answer for this scenario. Are we under budget, ahead of schedule, over budget, behind schedule, under budget, behind schedule, over budget, ahead of schedule, under budget, schedule unknown, or over budget, schedule unknown? Getting some votes in fast and furious. This is great. Just give you a couple more moments to vote. Kind of hard to fool this group. All right. Oh, sorry. There we go. Broadcast results. End poll. 66% of you said under budget and schedule is unknown, and that's exactly what I wanted you to say. One of you actually got it right, which is over budget. And you're all like, what? Now let's think about this for a second. We're at week 3, and if we're 10 widgets, 10 weeks, $10,000, well, it's $1,000 per widget, and so we should be $1,000 per week. So at week 3, we should be at $3,000, right? Yeah. Unfortunately, though, I didn't give you enough information. So let's just add a little piece of information here, and I'm just going to reset the poll. So we're going to redo this poll. Now, we're at week 3, but we've only built 2 widgets for an actual cost of $2,500. How are we doing? I'm chuckling because we've got a really savvy group who's just, quickly answering the right answer. So let's just give you a couple more moments. So we're at week 3. We've got 2 widgets built, $2,500, and our project plan was 10 widgets, 10 weeks, $10,000, and we're going to assume a linear flow. All right. Let's end the poll there. 92% of you got it right. Over budget, behind schedule. So we take a look at this, and here's what's happening. We should be building 1 widget per week. Now we're going to assume a linear flow, which means we don't have that whole learning curve thing we talked about. Which means I should, at the end of week 3, have built 3 widgets for a cost of $3,000. Now, we're over budget because if I only have 2 widgets, it should have cost me $2,000, right? And this is the classic scenario. When I take a look at these two, it's the exact same scenario. I just didn't share with you the full data. Okay, so when we only look at our status from a week schedule perspective, but don't consider whether we're ahead or behind and how much we've actually created, and we look at the dollars actually spent, we get this false perception. When I look at this, overwhelmingly people get this right? They take a quick look and go, well, duh, we're behind schedule and over budget, right? And this is the beauty and the power of earned value. Because what earned value does is it takes me back not to my schedule. It takes me back to how much product I've created. And here is the scenario that we're looking at. The earned value is way down the bottom here. Okay. And the planned value is above it, which means I'm behind schedule, and the actual cost is above the earned value. So when we take a look and compare these factors, we get a much clearer and correct picture. Right? So the earned value is how much stuff we've done. Right? So how many of those things on our Gantt chart can I check off and say they're done? And then I start looking at my costs, my actual costs for those and so on. So this allows us to do trending. Now, if we take a look at the first part of this graph, and I do have a pointer here somewhere. Yeah, oh well. If we take a look at the first part of this graph, you notice the 3 lines are diverging. They're getting worse. And if we left that to continue, it would continue to get worse. So our earned value is the bottom of the 3, so we're behind schedule over budget. Then somewhere around week 6, we did a corrective action, and we kind of got closer back to our original plan, and we're now tracking parallel to our original plan. So using these lines, I can now extrapolate that data forward and give you a prediction of how we're going to finish. And this is, folks, really the beauty and power of earned value, is it allows you to predict it forward. Now, when you're talking actual costs, do not go on paid invoices, because if I look at these 3 lines here, we've got our actuals, which is in the form of paid cash, our actuals, and then also the committed. So our actuals, the middle line is what we've spent, but we haven't processed the invoice yet, and then the committed is what we haven't actually spent yet. They're all going to come back together at the end. Now, if I only look at what's have actually been paid and processed, it may take 30, 60 days to process an invoice, maybe even 90 days. I'm now looking out the back window of my car as I drive down the road. So we really need to be thinking in terms of how much I have committed, how much I've actually, signed for, this kind of thing. And this is why we look at, timesheets and things, because we turn those into invoices in our accounting. Okay. Project success is more than just on budget. All of this is great, and we definitely want to try to hit that budget number as close as possible. But let's not forget, we got to look at that bigger picture, because if I start doing things like cutting scope or cutting quality or creating a product that's inferior just to hit that dollar number, you know what? Yeah, we're not going to have huge success here. So I'm going to leave you with a parting thought here, just to as we're running out of time. How can we do better? So I want you to lament on that and think about that and how we can do better as we move forward in our roles as project managers. And one of the biggest pieces I see is to look at that larger, bigger picture, to have a clear understanding of what the product is, how it fits into the the strategic goals of the organization, and how will this product help my companies to survive and move forward. So some key points here: you need to end up back in the black, right, which is survival. So we need to make sure that whatever benefit we're getting from that product, whether that's a monetary, we sell it, whether that's a monetary, we're being more efficient, or whether that's a non-monetary, we get more customers or we have better reputation in the industry, or whatever that looks like. Make sure that we've got a positive outcome on that. Estimates should be realistic, so we need to consider risks. Control expected and unexpected, hence the piece above, and then monitor accurately. So predict early, adjust as we go, and try to be as realistic and honest on that as possible. So to just loop back to our opening thought here, yes, we want to make our products, we want to run our projects at the lowest cost possible, but we need to bracket that. We need to put that in the context of best quality so that we've got something that works well, that lasts well. I remember my very first car that I bought, it was a Mercury Capri 2. When I sold it, I was spending more in maintenance in a month than my new car was costing me in car payments, right? So you know what? I actually got into a net gain when I traded up and got a newer car. But we also need to do this in a sustainable way, so paying the highest wages as possible. So we want to make sure that we end up with a team that's usable in the end, that we've got a system that works, that we can sustain and we can carry forward. And hence that's what the whole highest wages possible was, because Henry Ford recognized, if he pays really low wages, he won't have any market for the products that he's creating. Right? So we need to make sure that the company survives, that our people are usable at the end of the project, and we have a team again for the next project, and that sort of thing. All right. Whew, look at that, right on the 1 hour. Thank you guys so much. It's been a really great 1 hour. I'll leave it open for a few moments if anyone wants to pop it in the chat if they have any questions. My phone number and my email is down the bottom there. Feel free to contact me, and of course the PMI code is there. Look forward to seeing you guys next time. We're going to be looking at quality, and that is coming up in a month. The date, top of my head, can't remember. It's the first Friday of the month, so we'll be sending you out an email. Anyways, thanks so much for spending the hour with us today, and look forward to seeing you again in a month.